or perhaps I could ask Anthea to support and do that for me.
Sorry to interrupt you there. I can just see that Alison has taken over sharing of the screen. So sorry to interrupt you, but just it looks like your screen's not sharing anymore. If you're able to reshare it.
Yep, I can absolutely do that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Now, so I think that should be up and running.
A bit cold now, isn't it? Yeah, that looks good. It's back again, and I'll mute everybody now too. Thank you.
Superb. Thank you very much.
I'll bring the treats in a minute.
So the plan for this afternoon is we have we're going to be running this webinar in 2 sections. So we're going to start the webinar with a short presentation from myself. You'll be pleased to know it will be a short one, which will just give some context, and then I'll be handing over to members of my team who are also here, who will be able to answer some of the pre-submitted questions. We are aiming to answer as many of those as we can, but if we don't get to all of them, then we will make sure that we are circulating those at the end of the after the session as well. We are recording this, and we will be sharing a recording of the presentation and the full webinar so that others can also benefit. So without further ado, I shall get cracking. So my name is Verity Richards.
Sorry, my colleague is still waiting in the lobby. For some reason, she hasn't been. Oh, it looks like they're just trying to admit her now. I just didn't want you to start without her when she was trying to gain access.
Okay, I think that should be resolved. I'll leave that with Anthea.
Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
No, you're fine. Don't worry. We want to make sure that we do speak to everyone who wants to join us, so that is not a problem at all. So I'm Verity Richards. I'm one of the head of services here at the Housing Ombudsman, and I've been working on the complaint handling code. I was heavily involved in the consultation. Anyone that attended our webinars or saw me speak previously, I'm sorry, it is still me involved in the work that we're doing at the moment, and you'll be hearing, I'm sure, more from me. But then also working on our approach to monitoring compliance with the complaint handling code. That's my role, and I'm joined this afternoon by members of my team who are also involved. So a bit of background just to share with anyone who's in the room, everyone in the room. We first published our complaint handling code in 2020, and it was set out in the Housing Ombudsman scheme that we had the power to do so. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the aims of the code, but we've really summarised that the purpose of the code is to really support landlords to give that really good, high quality complaint handling approach, to really support that local resolution within the landlord's complaints procedures between residents and landlords. We recognise that that is the most valuable point, early resolution, move things forward, build those relationships with residents so that they feel that they don't need to come to us for investigations. In July 2023 was when the Social Housing Regulation Act 2023, which I'll be calling the Act because I can't say it over and over again, amended the Ombudsman's powers. The key for our discussion today is the power to issue a statutory code of practice, which is then sets out the processes that landlords need to have in place for complaint handling, and we call that the complaint handling code. In order for us to issue that, there was a statutory requirement for us to carry out a consultation, and hopefully you were all involved in the consultation which we put out in September, October and November last year. Once that's been reviewed, we've now published our complaint handling code. That was done on the 8th of February. And once issued, the statutory code comes into force, the Ombudsman also has a duty to monitor compliance with that code. So that's the amendments. That's not the full amendments to the Housing Ombudsman's powers. There are other powers and requirements set out in there, which includes the ability to issue wider orders. It also allows us to issue good practice, and there is a provision for us to provide a service to investigate complaints from between housing associations and residents about information sharing. That is separate to this, and I'm not really touching on those today. We will be releasing more information about that as we produce that. Very briefly on the consultation, as I've already said, we did that in autumn last year. We took part in lots and lots of webinars, face-to-face meetings. We engaged with residents through our relationships with TPAS. I also attended the Arch group. So we have attended and we have done those. We also engaged with our resident panel. And then with landlords, again, we ran webinars, we spoke at various different events, including the CIH. I'm sure many of you will have been a part of those. We received over 600 formal responses from across the sector and a phenomenal amount of comments, so over 1,400 comments in response to the different questions which were shared. And I've summarised the key findings, which hugely supportive of the provisions of the code and the approach to monitoring compliance. Still lots of questions, very understandable. What does this mean for organisations? What will this mean for residents? What will it mean in practice? And the key themes which came up through that consultation beyond those were from residents about the barriers that they'd experienced to making complaints, delays to receiving those responses, to receiving full responses and then the actions being completed, but also a real sense of the need for independent review of how complaints are being handled individually, but also the complaint handling service. From landlords, this won't be a surprise, I'm sure, to the people in the room, key themes around the challenges which are being faced by organisations, particularly around volumes, resources and the capacity to handle complaints in line with the provisions of the code, whilst also providing that quality service, depending on sizes, depending on operating models. I've already touched on requests for more guidance and more support, and these webinars form an early part of that. We've already released a lot of information on our website, and we intend to continue doing that. It was great as well because we received so many suggestions, ideas, recommendations, really showed the value of the consultation and the benefits that these can bring to us. For anyone that hasn't read it, the full details of this, including our key themes and responses to individual questions, they're all covered in our consultation response document. There is a link here and we'll be able to share that with you. In terms of the outcome of the consultation, hopefully you have all seen that we have now issued the Statutory Complaint Handling Code, and this applies to all members of the Housing Ombudsman scheme. With housing associations, we recognise that you may well have wider provisions, service provisions, such as care homes or other services which you're providing as part of the work that you do. And if you are a member that has services covered by the local government and social care ombudsman, you'll notice that although we initially said and intended to provide a joint complaint handling code, we've actually issued two separate codes which are really closely aligned, and that recognises the difference in the types of complaints which are being brought to the local government and social care ombudsman compared to the housing ombudsman, but also the operating environments of those different organisations. Alongside the code, you can see here we have published a large number of supporting documents. So we have the self-assessment, which is appended to the code, our frequently asked questions. We've also shared our equality impact assessment. They relate to the code. We've also set out our compliance framework, which gives the overarching approach that we will take to monitoring compliance. And through developing that work, we've also issued updated guidance on complaint handling failure orders. There is a dedicated web page. Again, the link is in this presentation, which we're happy to share with you, but it is all there on our website for you to see. I'm sure the real big ticket questions, what are the changes to the code? We have created an easy reference guide. The guide sets out the code in the latest version of the code, which was 2022, and then a summary of those changes and what that looks like in the 2024 code. It's set out in a table format, and it also gives information, rationale to those changes We've created that to make it easier for organisations to look at their policies and procedures if they wish to do so, and also compare and contrast. So that's there. The main areas of difference between the Code 2022 and the Code 2024 relate to the following, and I've listed them here. The requirement that there's only 2 stages, and that this includes any third-party arrangements. That was something that came to light in discussions and our reviews prior to the consultation. So recognising that some organisations have management agreements with, say, contractors or other organisation management agents, but clarifying that if complaints are handled in that way, that's included as part of the 2 stages. We've set out the timescales and requirements for acknowledging complaints at each stage. So at stage 1 and at stage 2, there is a requirement to acknowledge complaints within 5 working days. We've set out our reasons in the consultation document, but for clarity, the reason that we built that time in was to recognise and respond to the feedback from residents that part of a barrier that they'd experienced to complaint handling was lack of clarity about whether a complaint had actually been accepted and whether the organisation really had engaged with what the substantive issue was early. So that was one of the reasons. We've also set out the timescales for responding to each stage. So at stage 1, 10 working days from the point of acknowledgement with the opportunity to extend for a further 10 working days. And at stage 2, 20 working days after the acknowledgement, and again, extension for up to 20 working days. That guidance is there, and we've also set out our requirements for extensions. A key area which we know is really important to organisations, but also to residents, is about exclusions. So setting out expectations for what exclusions could be applied to the complaint handling policy, but also to the point of escalating complaints, because quite often through experience and feedback in the consultation, these weren't being consistently applied, and lots of queries about extra guidance needed is what we have set out there. Responding to feedback related to resourcing, we have set out the requirements or expectations for resourcing for complaint handling, and we've given more information about the member responsible for complaints. That's all supported by guidance on our website. The last point of difference is the requirement to produce and publish for residents and to share with wider stakeholders an annual complaints performance and service improvement report. And the purpose of that is to support transparency and accountability across landlords, to demonstrate that complaints are a core service, that they are being used, to drive service improvements, to share those successes, and to make sure that is being transparently shared. That is a very whistle-stop tour of the main changes to the code. I'd encourage everyone, if you haven't already, please do make the most of the documents which are on the website, that they are there for you so that you can see the full details. And I'm going to move on to the duty to monitor. That's what we will be calling, and we refer to our duty as the Housing Ombudsman to monitor compliance with the Complaint Handling Code. The code will apply from the 1st of April 2024, and that's when our duty to monitor compliance takes effect. I've already mentioned that we have published our code compliance framework. Again, that is on our website. You can review that. It was based on the second half of the consultation. We asked quite a lot of feedback about our intentions, so that's been used to inform our approach. We are going to monitor compliance in 3 key ways. So compliance in oversight and scrutiny, to ensure that self-assessments are completed, to ensure that those are being robustly evidenced, and that that is being submitted to the Housing Ombudsman for us to review, and that is how we intend to monitor that compliance. Compliance in policy, we'll be drawing on the feedback from self-assessments. Organisations will be expected to assure themselves that they comply in policy, but we will also be reviewing those. And then furthermore, we'll be looking at compliance in practice. So policy can be fully compliant, but is that being delivered in individual cases, in the wider service provision, and that's what we talk about compliance in practice. As with the work that we would do more broadly, we are going to continue to engage with landlords. If we do find any concerns about their compliance, be that in submissions and oversight, policy or practice, we will give opportunities to landlords to resolve any of those issues, and we will continue to support those organisations where appropriate. If that isn't generating compliance, and if it isn't a landlord isn't complying, or they're refusing to engage with us, even though we've given them opportunity to do so, we may issue a complaint handling failure orders. And we've set that out in our guidance document. As with any of our complaint handling failure orders, we will publish those, we'll continue to do so. But just to draw to your attention, as set out in our guidance, we may actually publish those as individual orders. So rather than including them in a report, we may choose to highlight a particular element of non-compliance, and that may be published. So what is our offering in terms of support for landlords? I've already mentioned our key documents are published on our website. We have a dedicated web page. We are continuing to review and enhance all of that offering. We will be issuing guidance on completing self-assessments, submitting those self-assessments and ensuring that those timescales are covered, but also providing information and guidance, possibly even a video. We're discussing at the moment the best formats for how to actually do that submission. It'll be via an electronic form. We are requiring everyone to do that, so we will be providing those. We're developing code-related e-learning, which is available via our Centre for Learning. You will have all signed up, I'm sure, to our Centre for Learning to be here, so that will be released then. And we're intending to continue to release further information in the form of micro-learns. They will be shorter, more focused modules about key aspects of the code. We will be generating those and providing those based on feedback from these webinars, discussions with landlords, responses to our FAQs. We'll be using those to inform the information that we share across that platform. And we'll be continuing to run webinars throughout 2024-2025, and you will all be able to access those as you have done today. We also have a dedicated email, which again you can see here, compliance@housing-ombudsman.org.uk, and we'll be responding to those individual queries by email. Any of those queries where we do receive a large number in a particular area, we'll then update our frequently asked questions. We intend to keep those live and under review so that they are useful, and then we will build on those during the year. That is my very short introduction. We're now going to hand over to questions. As I said at the start, we're going to focus on those pre-submitted questions, and we will answer any additional queries as we can. If we don't get through all of them, we'll answer any pre-submitted questions in a follow-up email, and those will also be published. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And I believe, Anthea, you were going to spotlight the team that are going to be answering the questions.
Let's spotlighting them now.
Super, thank you.
Hi everybody. My name's Jamie Strong. I'm one of the managers here at the Housing Ombudsman. I've been working on some of the changes to the code as well as our duty to monitor. So I'm going to ask my team members here, Maria and Danielle, to read out some of the questions, and I'll try and give you the best answers I can. I am using another screen, so if I'm over this way, apologies, just because I've got another screen here. If you do have any follow-on questions as a result of when I sort of give you the answers, please pop them in the chat, and anything we don't have time to get through today, as Verity said, we'll share those after the webinar. So, want to get started.
So hi everybody, I'm Maria, and what we'll do is we've grouped all the pre-submitted questions together to try and help give you the answers that you need, so we're not here, there and everywhere with them. So we're going to start with timescales first. And the first one was submitted by Connect Housing. And the question was, the 10 working days from acknowledgement date, please can you clarify if it is day 1 of the acknowledgement date or the following day? I do think there's something in the chat, but Jamie?
Yep, so just to clarify, there's 2 timescales here. You've got your 5 working days for acknowledging the complaint, and then you've got 10 working days from that acknowledgement to issue your stage 1 complaint response. So in terms of which is day number 1, I would say the day after you send the acknowledgement is day 1. So I'll give you an example. If a complaint was received today, you'd have 5 working days to issue acknowledgement, up to 5 working days. So that would be due on the 14th of March. And then you'd have 10 working days from there to issue the stage 1 response. And day 1 of the 10 working days will start on the 15th, so that following day, with the response due on the 21st. No, sorry, 28th of March.
Next question submitted was by Housing 21. Can we acknowledge and formally respond to can we acknowledge and formally respond at stage 1 to speed up the process and make it more straightforward? Yep.
So landlords absolutely can decide to respond acknowledge and respond at the same time if they feel they're able to do that. They just need to make sure they are taking into account the requirements at the stage 1 of the code, and also obviously the stage 2 requirements. So as long as they are meeting those requirements, if they're doing it at the same time, that's absolutely fine.
And sorry to jump in on that, just to further clarify, if an organisation chooses to take that approach, then the acknowledgement and response would be 5 working days. It wouldn't be that it could be acknowledged and responded to within the 10 days. The 5 days acknowledgement would take precedence.
And the final one on timescales was from South Liverpool Homes, and they've asked, within the previous code, there was specific guidance around timescales for a resident to request escalation of a complaint. A landlord must include in its complaints policy its timescales for a resident to request an escalation. Is this approach still acceptable within the new code?
So the code does not include a provision around how long a resident has to request to escalate their complaint to stage 2. So therefore it's up to the landlord whether they want to include this in their complaints policy or not. What we would say though is if a landlord does wish to impose a time limit for escalating to stage 2, there's a few things they should consider. So that this is clearly detailed within their complaints policy, that it's clearly stated in the landlord's stage 1 response letter how long a resident's got to escalate. Any time limit for a resident to respond or escalate should be fair, reasonable and proportionate. This should also allow for residents to adopt a wait and see approach, just to see whether the actions that have been proposed in the stage 1 response resolve the complaint or not. It should not be overly restrictive and not place any unnecessary barriers on residents. It must consider whether to apply discretion to accept complaints made outside of this time limit where there are good reasons to do so. So this may include, but is not limited to extenuating circumstances, vulnerable residents, making reasonable adjustments to maximise accessibility and efficiency of the complaint handling process.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to questions about extensions now. So we've got a couple of questions in that area. So this one comes from EMH. So it says, is the maximum amount of time an extension can be applied for stage 1, 10 days at stage 1 and 20 days at stage 2, or can this be more than one extension or, further extension?
So the code allows for an extension for up to 10 working days at stage 1 and 20 working days at stage 2. A landlord doesn't have to get the resident's agreement for that, but they must confirm in writing to the resident and when they can expect to receive that response. We do appreciate there may be some exceptional circumstances where landlords might need to extend over that timescale. We do see that to be few and far between. Scenarios, for example, like where the landlord has initiated its business continuity plan, like in a cyber attack or something like that. If that happens and a landlord does need to extend further than those 10 or 20 working days, they must write to the resident and confirm the reasons why, and they must provide the resident with the Housing Ombudsman's details so that they can contact us and to then issue the response as soon as they possibly can. I would also add that they should be keeping, if they do see that going on for some time, they should be keeping contact with the resident regularly, agreeing how often the resident wants to be updated, that sort of thing.
We did have another one from Carbon Homes, but that was covering something you just covered. So I'll move on to submission of self-assessment. So are we being asked to submit our self-assessment for 2023 to 2024 via the new portal by the 30th of June to reflect performance against the new code or against the current 2022 code? And that was from Coastline Housing Limited.
So your self-assessments or your submissions, they won't be via the portal. They'll be via a separate dedicated form that will be available from the 1st of April 2024. The self-assessment then will be due by the 30th of June 2024, and it should represent a snapshot of its current compliance with the new code, the statutory code. The landlord should then reassess on an annual basis, and they may even be required to reassess more frequently, say in the event of any major policy changes, any significant restructures or mergers, or on request from the Housing Ombudsman. The data that you'll be covering will be for 2023 to 2024. If you want to include more post April 2024, you can do that. Hope that was clear. Sorry, I don't know.
Okay, so we move on to question about annual complaints and service improvement report. This was submitted by Bourneville Village Trust, and they've asked us, our annual complaints performance and service improvement report have to cover April 23 to March 24, or can we select a different period, example January to December 23?
So landlords will be expected to report on their 2023 to 2024 performance in the annual complaints performance and service improvement report. As I said before, they can choose to include additional information regarding how they've performed for the period from April 2024 until their submission date, if they wish to do so.
So we've got quite a few questions about service requests as well. So the first one comes from Moat. So we would like further clarification around service requests and whether the volume of these will be reportable. If a chase for contact, etc., is classed as a service request, for example, then arguably any contact a customer makes where they are chasing will constitute a service request.
So there's a flowchart setting out key scenarios relating to service requests as an appendix in the complaint handling code. We do recognise that landlords would benefit from more information about good practice on complaint handling versus service requests, and we will be publishing further information on this in our Centre for Learning, and it will be covered in more detail. The flowchart essentially, just to confirm, it says that if a landlord is able to respond to the resident with an explanation and resolution, and the resident is happy with that, providing the landlord is giving the resident the option to raise a complaint if they would like to do that, then, and the resident says they don't want to and they're happy with that situation, that explanation that the landlord has given them over the phone and that resolution, that is okay. But the key thing here is they must give the resident the option to raise a complaint.
Okay, so the next one is from Paradigm Housing. Can you expand on the expectations of recording, monitoring and reviewing service requests?
Landlords should record all service requests received and monitored, and monitor each to completion. The detail and way in which the landlords record this information and how regularly it reviews it will be led by the individual landlord. When deciding this, the landlord will need to consider what information it would like to understand and report on. As a minimum, we would suggest that the landlord record the area of service provision and the dates it was received and resolved. Landlords may wish to include information about service requests as part of their annual report to share how these approaches, how these have worked for them, and also any learning as a result.
Okay, so the next one comes from West Kent Housing Association, and it says, please can you clarify the service request section? So 1.4, a service request is a request from a resident to their landlord requiring action to be taken to put something right. Service requests should be recorded, monitored and reviewed regularly. Can you define what you mean by action to put something right? And also, could you expand on how the service requests should be tracked and monitored? I think you've already covered part of that on the last one, but yeah.
Yeah, so landlords should use their own respective processes and procedures to put things right on discussion with the resident. The nature of what is agreed will be dependent on what issue is actually reported, but it could look in this, they could look to include things like rebooking an appointment, arranging a telephone call, or for another action to be taken. In terms of tracking them, that was just explained just a moment ago. I don't know if you want to add anything to that one, Verity.
Yep, so happy to add that one. I appreciate it's a very Ombudsman response to say what are those resolutions and what should they look like. The code is to set the framework of what of how those services should be delivered, and actually it will very much depend. So as Jamie's mentioned, if somebody is calling and saying that they are unhappy, for example, because their door is their front door is broken, quite often that would be a service request, especially if it's the first time that a landlord's being made aware of that. So sort of explaining that, but the resolution that would be agreed with the resident would very likely be, thank you very much, we're going to raise this as a service request, we're going to attend, potentially do the inspection, replace the door and to make necessary repairs, which would be very different to a service request related to antisocial behaviour. So if somebody's reporting antisocial behaviour, it might be that you would want a specialist member of your teams to attend, depending on your operational arrangements. So it's very much for landlords to agree that resolution with the resident. And as Jamie's mentioned before, the key intention of us talking about this and to highlight it in the code as a requirement is that service requests can provide real insight into areas that the organisation might want to target further work. It may be able to inform future decisions related to investments, for example, if you're receiving high numbers in particular areas, but also looking at what is successful, what agreements with residents is successful to resolve a situation for them without the need for them to ask for a formal complaint. But it's just ensuring that if a resident is expressing dissatisfaction and frustration with the situation, that they are given that opportunity to raise a complaint should they wish to.
Okay, so the next question that we have comes from EMH. It says, if a resident is happy for their expression of dissatisfaction to be handled as a service request, is there a time limit on how long this service request can be open for?
So if an issue is being resolved through a service request, landlord would be expected to keep these open, tracked and monitored to completion. The code does not set out a time limit for these to be completed. However, landlords should ensure that actions are completed within the relevant timescales they've got set out in their own policies.
And this is the final question on service requests that we've got pre-submitted. So it's from the Guinness Partnership. The code 1.3 states that whenever a resident expresses dissatisfaction, landlords must give them the choice to make a complaint. Does this mean at any point, irrespective of whether we have had a chance to respond to the service request, if a resident expresses dissatisfaction, then we should give them the choice to make a complaint? Is that the intention?
Yes, exactly that. The resident should be given the option to make a complaint.
Okay, so we'll move on to a question regarding the MRC, so member responsible for complaints. This was submitted by Watmos Community Homes, and they've asked, can the MRC be someone on a committee that has been given delegated responsibility by the group board?
So no, the MRC should be a member of the governing body. So for housing associations, this means the main board. For councils, it means the lead member or a councillor who has oversight in the Cabinet for Housing. And sorry, just to add that we have a whole page on our website about MRCs with lots of information on there if you do need that. Sorry, if you want to add anything there further, Verity.
No, I think that covers it. We have produced our guidance that is on our website. It's a key topic. I'd really encourage anyone who is looking at the governance arrangements to look at the member responsible for complaints. It is a new role. It is brought in through the complaint handling code. The intention is to make sure, and through the code and through the work, that the board is receiving suitable oversight, they're engaged, but also that they have a responsibility at the board level and at governance level to ensure that that positive complaint handling culture is being embedded across the entire organisation. The other role which is set out in the code is a suitably senior person who is responsible for complaint handling, and those people who are eagle-eyed in the previous code, we had said that needed to be a suitably senior executive. We've actually moved that to a suitable person because it reflects the different operating environments and structures of organisations. So that person, the senior person, will be responsible for complaint handling operationally. We would see them as being responsible for reporting, for ensuring that the service improvements or lessons learned are being embedded. But that reporting is then being elevated to the board via the member responsible for complaints. There is information on there, and one of my colleagues, possibly Anthea, will be able to confirm. We are, for those who attended our previous member responsible for complaints conference, we're intending to run another conference for those individuals this year as well, just to further enhance that learning and share that across that governing body level. Thanks, Jamie.
Right. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. It's another reporting question from Magenta Living. I think I've seen this one in the chat actually as well a few times. Can you please confirm whether the decision to move partially upheld as a viable outcome to complaints was agreed, as I have been unable to locate any specific reference to this within the code itself or the supporting documentation.
Yep, so through the consultation, the requirement to record the outcome of the complaints in a particular way has been removed. So rather that landlords are required to set out the outcome of the complaint, which will typically include whether the landlord views the complaint or the individual elements of the complaint to have been upheld or not.
And just to add to that, because I know it's been a bit of a hot topic, and I have to be honest, I was surprised how much of a hot topic it was. So that was interesting for me. One of the main reasons that we made that decision was around through the feedback from the consultation. So in some instances, organisations were highlighting that actually a partially upheld would need its own definition. Does it fit for every scenario? How would you ensure that they were being consistently reported for benchmarking purposes, etc. But also from a resident perspective, and when we were looking at getting feedback, particularly through our resident panel, but through the consultation as well, that actually that is not always the most helpful way to look at the outcome of a complaint, particularly where there are multiple different issues which have been reported, which is why we've stayed silent in the code, but we do intend to use our work, and I did see a question come up. We are intending to use the work that we do to monitor compliance to really identify where there is really positive practice, to explore where there are further feedback activities that can inform our position, and that we can share that through our Centre for Learning. And that was one that was very much highlighted about the most effective way to report the outcome of a complaint, so that residents are clear what part of their complaint has been accepted, upheld. I mean, there's so many different words that can be used, and then how that could be recorded so that we can share that with across the sector.
Thanks, Verity. So the next question we had was on MP inquiries. This was again from Watmoss Community Homes, and they have asked, can we have some clarification on a complaint that is being submitted via a third party or representative must be handled in line with the landlord's complaints policy? Does this mean that when we receive an inquiry from an MP, we need to log this as a complaint and include this in our complaint numbers?
So landlords should handle member inquiries in the same way it would handle contact made by a resident. So often the member inquiries start as inquiries and lead to service requests or even possibly complaints. It is reasonable for landlords to have an opportunity to respond to member inquiries as service requests for issues reported for the first time. Where a landlord decides to respond in this way, the member should be informed of the decision and the next steps. Members or residents that express dissatisfaction with the landlord's approach to resolving the substantive issue or the outcome must then be given the opportunity to make a complaint. And if that resident decides to go down the complaints route, then the complaint should be raised at stage 1 of the complaints procedure and follow through the landlord's complaints process. Where landlords receive members' inquiries and its file shows that there's been previous repeat contact from a resident about the same issue, what we would say is that this does indicate the resident has tried to raise something themselves, they're still dissatisfied and they've had to try and escalate the matter to get it resolved. So in this scenario, we would encourage the landlord to contact the resident to explore the reasons why they remain dissatisfied and ask if they would like the matter investigated as complaint. The landlord can still respond to the member inquiry in that scenario and just say what action it has taken.
Okay, the next question that we have, Jamie, is regarding our relationship with the regulator. So the regulator, it's from Bolton at Home. The regulator for social housing new consumer standard and code of practice also requires us to comply with the Housing Ombudsman Code. how will your monitoring of compliance with the code and the regulator inspections on consumer standards fit together?
Do you want to take this one, Verity?
Yeah, more than happy to take that one. So absolutely recognise that there is a really close synergy between what the regulator is looking at under consumer standards, but also the Housing Ombudsman Code and how that fits together. Both organisations are committed to minimising the any impact or burden on landlords, because ultimately we all want the most important work to be going on, which is the service delivery rather than providing that information. We are actively engaging with the regulator of social housing to develop and refine a memorandum of understanding, which we will be publishing on our website. We're also intending to set out our more detailed operational arrangements, which will then set out, so the memorandum of understanding will set out what will be shared between those two organisations and the timescales, but also further information about what that work in practice will look like. So the intention is that the two organisations will work very closely together to minimise the burden but maximise the insight between the two. And I should add, sorry to jump back in on myself, but we will be publishing that. So that will be sort of mentioned, but it will be on the website. You will be able to review those and to share anything or to ask any questions once you've seen that document.
Great, thanks, Verity. So we move on to the next question, and this is around vulnerabilities, which is now one of the big parts of the new 2024 code. This was submitted by Anchor, and they've asked, please clarify the expectation around the collection and review of information on residents' vulnerabilities. Are we expected to collect and review for all residents at all touch points or only in the complaint process? Is there an expectation that there will be is there an expectation that we will report on reasonable adjustments? If so, what are you expecting to see?
So the intention of this particular requirement in the code is to ensure that landlords are fully aware of any reasonable adjustments required to ensure that the resident can access the complaints process. We'd say that landlords are expected to confirm this at key points of the complaints process. So, for example, at the point the complaint is raised, and then if further information about access is identified in the course of an investigation, to check then. But yeah, just key points along the process.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, we also have the other requirements. So that's for accessing the complaints process and keeping that under review. When we say under review, that would be, as Jamie's mentioned, like key points, but also, and again, I'm sure that you are already doing this, but if new information was to come to light about a resident's requirements or a change in vulnerability or a change in their needs, that you would be reviewing, well, actually, is that reasonable adjustment? Does that need to be reviewed? Does that need to be updated? But also just to sort of, I guess, alert you, because many of you will be complaint handlers, is that quite often a reasonable adjustment needed to access particular services may well be different to what is needed in order to access the complaints process itself. Because, for example, you might have a reasonable adjustment around knocking on a door and waiting for a period of time for somebody to attend the property, but actually that may not be appropriate or necessary for the complaints process, and there may be something that's alternative, like waiting for a particular time for a telephone call, just as an example. So just being alert to whenever there's a complaint, ensuring that access to the complaints process is being considered and adjustments for that. The other thing just to highlight on the equalities side of things is around ensuring that as an organisation you are reviewing and considering the profile of your tenants and your residents, and ensuring that if there are any particular needs that need to be addressed through the complaints or in the complaints policy, those are being considered. So an example which had come up, which was actually shared by an organisation, and apologies if you're in the room because I can't remember who it was, but one organisation shared that they'd recognised that there were a large number of residents who were requesting information in a particular language. I can't remember again which language it was, and actually they'd taken that decision based on their resident profile to actually provide that as standard and explain their reasons why. So sort of two elements. So is the complaints process accessible for the resident profile, but then also are individuals able to access the complaints process throughout? And I'm not sure who I'm handing back to, but I think it's Danny. You're on mute, Danny.
Sorry, apologies. Right. Sorry, I've just lost where I am. Yeah, I've lost it. Maria, sorry, do you have the page?
Yep, no problems, Danny. So the last question was on staff performance and objectives, and this was submitted by Anchor, and they've asked, could you please provide clarity on the expectation that the standard colleague performance objective around complaints reflects the relevant professional bodies' codes of practice? Please, can you state which professional bodies would be appropriate? Could you confirm if the first annual complaints performance, I think we've had this one, but I will read it out, the first annual complaints performance and service improvement report to be produced in line with submission of the TSMs and self-assessment will be covered by April 23 to March 24, or our performance against the current 22-23 code. I think we've probably already had that, but it was all part of that one question.
Yeah, two questions there. So the first one, anything sort of objective setting would be for the landlord to decide on, depending on their individual approaches or performance management. Landlords may wish to liaise with the CIH for more information on this and on professional standards. Verity might want to elaborate further on that one.
No, as I think the key point here is the intention of this provision is to ensure that there are key objectives and that those are being tracked and supported for those complaint handlers. What those objectives are will very much depend on your individual frameworks. It will depend on your behaviour frameworks, for example, visions, values, styles, and it's important that those are, you know, those all sort of work together with your own frameworks. The key is that those are there. The point about professional standards, so Chartered Institute of Housing would be who we would recommend that you would speak to, but there are other organisations. It's just that the CIH is probably the main body that we would refer organisations to look at those objectives. Do you want to do the second part? I think we did cover that.
Yeah, we can do just I'll summarise. So submissions for 2024 will be aligned to the tenant satisfaction measures for 2023 to 2024. And as we said before, if a landlord wishes to provide more information about more recent performance, then they can do that.
Yeah, so just picking up on that point, the intention of those reports is to really, as I sort of said in the introduction, it's really about supporting landlords and ensuring that landlords are being open and transparent and accountable to their residents, but absolutely recognise that the style of those reports, what's included in those reports will vary very much from organisation to organisation. So there are some organisations who shared in the consultation that actually they have scrutiny panels who will create an annual report to tenants. They will include it in that. And the style of that type of report would be very different to another organisation, which is why we have said the reports are required, but we're not at this stage providing any templates. We're not giving examples. We have set out in section 8, and I can't remember which provision, but in section 8 we do set out the minimum requirements of things which do need to be covered, and that would be what we would look for if we were assessing compliance with that particular provision. But the details of the how would be really down to individual landlords. Again, one of the huge benefits to having a submissions and compliance framework for us, and hopefully for the sector, and we intend it to be for the sector, is that we're able to then review these. We will be reviewing these, and again, we can use our experience, the connections that we have, the sharing of information across the sector to then pull together examples of good practice, examples of best practice that we would see, and then share those with organisations. If we choose to take that approach, which I'm very hopeful that we will, take that approach, we would be using our approach to good practice, which would involve a consultation and call for evidence. So we would also be inviting particularly residents to share their views, but other stakeholders, so any trade bodies and individual landlords, to give examples, to give comment, so that we get that full picture that we then can share as best practice. So that is the approach that we would be looking to take on those. I think I can see that people are taking real advantage of the questions time in the chat, but I'm conscious of time, so I can see that they are still coming through, and I know that other members of Jamie's team have been providing responses. We will be picking those up and we will be providing those responses to people outside of the webinar, and we can answer any of those questions. I did see, and I think Anthea probably responded, are we sharing versions of the slides? Yes, absolutely. I did embed all the links that I could try and put together to be helpful into that presentation, so that will be there on those. I can see that there were a couple of questions about releasing information and when will the guidance be available. We are planning to release them imminently. I'm sorry, I can't give you a firmer date than that, but they will be shared with organisations. You can sign up for our newsletters, which I'm sure you already have, and we will be sharing and making sure that people are made aware where we are providing that information. If you have any questions in the interim, we've shared our email address. Jamie and her team will be available to answer those questions, and we will aim to be responding to organisations within 5 days where we can. We may need to extend, but that is our is how we're intending to manage those. So they will be there. We're going to take a recording of this webinar that will be shared on the shared on our website, and we'll be also publishing the responses to these questions, as well as links to our frequently asked questions. So I hope that that has been really useful, and that we've answered your questions, possibly given you some more questions to think about, which is fine, and we're here to answer them and make sure that we are sharing those. Oh no, people are making advantage of it, taking advantage. I've suddenly had a few coming through last minute, so do feel free to pop those in the chat, and we will get back to you. Huge thank you to those people who had submitted those questions. We've managed to get around them all, I think, in the time that we had, Jamie.
There were a few duplicates, to be fair, so we will go through them. Any that we haven't answered, we will make sure we share.
Yeah. Absolutely. So a huge thank you to everyone that's attended. Again, hope it's been really useful. We'll continue to be running these. You'll be made aware and you'll be able to sign up for these, and have a really lovely rest of the afternoon. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.